Chup chup simbe, chup chup simbe, simbe tang li tang, simbe tang li tang.
Australia's economy relies on tens of thousands of migrant workers from the Pacific. They labour on farms, in abattoirs, and in the care economy under what's known as the PALM scheme.
I would, at times in the depths of my frustration, imagine even this local economy in Lytton void of Pacific Islander workers. It will break the town. Yeah, the town will literally shut down. The largest employer in town has a quarter of its workforce from the Pacific Islands. So if a quarter of the workforce just comes from one program, one singular program, I don't care whether it's direct employment or otherwise, it just means their contribution is invaluable. And if you dismiss it, that is to the detriment of the organizations or businesses' existence.
Welcome to episode 3 of Palmed Off, a special 4-part series of Follow the Money exploring the PALM scheme. In episode 2, we met Ken Dachi, who works in the New South Wales town of Lytton. He advocates for PALM workers who have walked away from the scheme because of bad living and working conditions. At the heart of the problem is the power imbalance created because workers can't easily leave their employer.
Worker portability is an essential component in the program. In fact, the program's name or title gives it away. The acronym is PALM, Pacific Australia Labour Mobility, meaning mobility or portability of employment is a central tenet in the program. You and I have the right to change employers overnight. One little disappointment, depending on the degree of our reaction, may necessarily result in us quitting those jobs and moving on to new ones, because we can exercise that right. The question is, how do we structure a program that binds an individual to an employer? This is why it's an ethical, moral issue rather than a legislative one.
This shouldn't be controversial. The right to choose where to work is fundamental to the idea of free labour that underpins the market economy.
It is no longer a legislative issue. It is a human rights issue. It's understanding that these guest workers are people, first and foremost. And so if they are people, and the rules that we do have ordinarily for every other member of workforce here in Australia need to cut across to this program.
Unsurprisingly, this sentiment is shared by Australia's Pacific neighbours. Muriel Melton-Oven is Vanuatu's Commissioner for Labour.
We're not dealing with commodities. Our workers are not commodities. They are human beings and we need to take care of them. It's because of our workers that a farmer can economically sustain his or her business. And, people or citizens can have food on the table. It's because of these workers. They are doing our job, but in return, we should also take care of them.
But the problems are not just economic. They affect some of the most intimate parts of people's lives.
So people who are in Australia with the PALM scheme, they're required to take out private health insurance as a condition of their visa. So this is sort of the overseas visitor insurance.
That's Dr. Lindy Kanan, who spent 4 years researching the PALM scheme, mostly through her work at the ANU. Medicare has a cherished place in the Australian community. If you're a citizen and you have a medical emergency, you can generally get treated at a hospital for free. If you're sick, Medicare might cover the full cost of the doctor, or at least a fair chunk of it. But if you're working in Australia on a PALM visa, that safety net is denied to you.
So, in theory, what happens is that if someone has an emergency, they'll go to the hospital and all of their medical needs are covered through that health insurance. In practice, what I found from speaking to people is that sometimes people who are here with the PALM scheme, they'll go to the hospital if they have a medical problem, even if it's not an emergency, and they'll get billed for that if it's not a genuine emergency.
That bill can be a big financial burden for somebody on a typical PALM visa worker's income, so some people go without medical treatment instead.
From my experience and the people that I've spoke to, they're trying to save as much money to send home as possible. They're getting pressure from home to send money. And sometimes after deductions, they don't have a lot of money left over. So, they're quite concerned about going to a hospital, going to a doctor, and how that might affect their bank balance.
Matt Withers has spent years looking at the PALM scheme as a researcher at the ANU. He says the lack of access to Medicare is patently unfair.
Is completely egregious that PALM workers who are paying taxes are unable to draw on the social protection system that they are effectively funding. And Medicare seems a really obvious option to be extended to PALM workers in order to reduce the deductions they currently pay for private medical insurance and to improve the well-being of workers who are in frontline occupations who do actually regularly sustain injury and illness.
The lack of affordable, accessible medical care can play out in terrible ways.
I had 2 instances where workers were working while operating, on a day's operations.
That's a former PALM visa worker we're calling John. When I spoke to him in Port Vila, Vanuatu, he talked about horrific incidents that happened to workmates during his time working at a tomato farm. One involved a piece of machinery he calls a crusher, which mulched whole plants after the tomatoes had been harvested. It also picked up weed suppression mats, which John calls carpets.
So we were ripping off all plants and putting them to crusher, and then the crusher would rip them up, have them in bags, dispose of them, I think. So that crusher has a carpet tied to it. So that carpet it winds up the carpet, and then all the plants on the crusher gets thrown into the crusher. So this guy was operating the crusher. While he was operating the crusher, the carpet got jammed. So that guy put his hand inside the roller and then was trying to remove the jammed carpet. But then the supervisor switched on the crusher without getting a thumbs up from him or the other person. His arm was already jammed inside. The machine jammed up his hand and crushed it, snapped it in half. We all ran towards him and checked if he was okay. But he just said he couldn't feel his arm. It was cold.
So what happened to him? Could he use his health insurance?
So his health insurance was not the one that could cover a broken arm. They just quickly take him back to the nearest airport, flown to the available international airport, and taken back to the country.
This wasn't the only serious injury John saw. Another time, a co-worker lost a finger. They were pruning or de-leafing tomato plants.
So that worker is de-leafing, removing unwanted leaves from the plant. While he was operating his chores, there was a lady who was also on a rail cart. She was pollinating the plants. So as she was going in towards that row, that guy was already in that row. And then she called him and told him to move his cart. But by the time she let him know that she was coming close, he did not slow down the cart. So the guy was trying to operate the speed of his cart to move further up. While he was doing it with one of his snips on his hand, he was trying to hold on to it. The lady hit him, and that snip chopped off his finger.
So what happened to him?
So that guy, they called the ambulance for him. They took him to the hospital, and then he got flown to a bigger hospital near the town that we were staying. And then again, his insurance was not entitled to cover up such huge injury.
The lack of adequate healthcare for PALM workers is a particular issue for women who fall pregnant. Researcher Lindy Kanan explains.
There are a number of issues that disproportionately impact women, so particularly around if a woman becomes pregnant while she's working here in Australia, or if she's pregnant when she arrives, there can be quite significant issues. For example, with the health insurance policies, there's a 12-month waiting period for any pregnancy-related services, so it means that if a woman does present with pregnancy-related concerns, she'll have to pay for those upfront and won't have a way to get a rebate through health insurance.
Beyond the issue of pregnancy, Lindy has concerns about sexual assault.
So this is happening in a number of different forms. There's sort of workplace sexual harassment, which is happening in workplaces as well as at accommodation sites. And then also sort of under that heading, we have intimate partner violence and sexual assault, which is also taking place within the context of the PALM scheme. The PALM scheme does have rules around, for example, men and women can't share accommodation. But we do have situations where maybe on farms or there's accommodation such as caravan parks or backpackers that have been repurposed, and men and women, although they've got separate rooms, they're still at the same site. And so it's kind of in these situations where we are seeing reports of sexual harassment, sexual assault.
This is something that Emelda Davis is also concerned about. Emelda is the descendant of South Sea Islanders transported to Australia to work as part of the practice known as blackbirding. In her work advocating for palm workers, she's travelled all over Australia.
What I've seen and witnessed with my journeys across this nation as a part of the PALM scheme, it's just not acceptable. It's not acceptable. And then in some cases, it's men and women, okay, in the one dormitory, and that's culturally inappropriate. I wouldn't do that myself, and I'm born here in this country. I wouldn't be sharing with men in a room like that. So why do our women have to come here and live under these conditions?
I'm Morgan Harrington, and this has been Palmed Off, a special 4-part series of Follow the Money. In the next and final episode,
they're essentially living here, working here, paying taxes here, but have less rights than citizen workers. And that, I don't think that is really what Australians consider is fair, and I don't think that is good for our long-term social ethics of how we want our country to be.
Palmed Off was written and produced by Morgan Harrington, with production and script advice from Stephen Long. Sound production and engineering by Simon Branthwaite. The song you have heard is Mumbwe from the album Sorusian by Ni Vanuatu artist Tio, with thanks to the One Talk Music Foundation. This podcast was recorded in Canberra, on the lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples.
Mambe Mesa.